This is Graham Hornigold. Born in 1974 on a British Army base, Graham Hornigold grew up without a mother, raised by his father and in foster care. Hornigold has described his childhood as challenging, citing his father's alleged alcoholism and abuse. He found solace in cooking, beginning his culinary career at age 14, earning him several awards. He later got into a relationship with chef Heather Kaniuk. In 2019, Hornigold and his partner Heather Kaniuk founded Long Boys, a gourmet finger donut brand with locations in London's Borough Yards, King's Cross, and Liverpool Street. Graham and Heather shared many common interests and enjoyed a happy, fulfilling relationship, made even more joyful by the anticipation of their first child. Yet, despite the love and stability in his life, Graham continued to yearn for a connection he had long been without, his mother's love. His longing never waned. In the year 2020, everything changed, preparing to welcome his son from his soon-due partner. On a fateful morning, he received an email. A woman named Dionne Marie Hannah claimed to be his biological mother, a stranger who knew things only she could know. She answered personal questions. Graham and Heather agreed to meet Dionne at the hotel where she was staying. From the moment they met, Dionne exuded energy and charm, making an immediate impression. Their first encounter was warm and effortless, they connected almost instantly. During the conversation, Dionne expressed regret for her absence in Graham's life. One thing significantly stood out about Dionne. She spent so well, she was lodged at a 5-star hotel and ordered the most costly wine. Claiming to be a daughter of the Sultan of Brunei, a polyglot businesswoman with a vast fortune. She showered Graham, his partner Heather Kaniuk, and friends with lavish gifts, luxury hotel stays, a Range Rover, BMW, designer clothes as a make-up for her absence. She claimed to have terminal illnesses, brain tumor and bone marrow cancer, and said she'd will her entire fortune to Graham before she passes in 6 months' time. In September 2020, Heather gave birth to a baby boy. Graham was overjoyed. He now had a family of his own, was basking in the long-awaited affection of his mother, and stood to inherit a substantial trust fund. Life seemed perfect. However, the harmony was soon disrupted when Dionne began demanding increased attention. She frequently called Graham, often claiming she was on the brink of death. Caught between the responsibilities of caring for his ailing mother at her hotel and supporting his newborn and partner at home, Graham made the difficult decision to move Dionne into his house. What initially seemed like a thoughtful and necessary decision soon turned into a nightmare for Heather. Dionne grew increasingly manipulative, often attempting to assert control over both Graham and the baby. 2 months after the birth of their son, Dionne began discussing a trip to Switzerland with Graham, supposedly to finalize paperwork related to accessing his trust fund. For Heather, this seemed like a relief from Dionne's troubles. However, she had no idea it would mark the beginning of a shift in their relationship. Once in Switzerland, Dionne and Graham indulged in a life of luxury, booking an extravagant hotel, dining on gourmet meals, and enjoying the finest wines, with little regard for moderation. Not long into their stay, Dionne began asking Graham for money, claiming she was temporarily unable to access her own funds due to COVID-related restrictions. She assured him she would repay every cent once her accounts were accessible. Trusting her, Graham covered their lavish lifestyle in Switzerland, expensive hotels, fine dining, and luxury services, eventually spending between €20,000 and €25,000. He felt no hesitation. After all, it was his mother, and repayment seemed certain. What was originally planned as a 4-day trip quickly extended, first to weeks, then a full month, with no signed documents or access to the trust fund. They met with lawyers and even visited the private banking sector, but progress was elusive. Back home, Heather grew increasingly distressed. Left alone to care for their newborn, she had no family support and little assistance. The absence of Graham weighed heavily, forcing her to rely on neighbors for basic needs like shopping for baby formula. As Christmas approached, Graham remained conflicted, torn between returning to his partner and newborn in London or staying in Switzerland to care for Dionne, whose health she claimed was rapidly declining. Eventually, he made his way back to reunite with Heather and his son. Plans were set in motion to travel to New Zealand, Heather's family home, to introduce their child to her relatives. But just as they were preparing to leave, Dionne made another emotional plea. She claimed her doctor had given her only a few weeks, or possibly days, to live and that she would die alone if Graham left. Once again, Graham was caught in a painful choice between his family and his allegedly dying mother. he ultimately chose to remain with Dionne. Heartbroken and disillusioned, Heather left for New Zealand with their son. While in New Zealand, Heather made a troubling discovery. Dionne had made Graham open multiple credit cards in his name, which she had used to finance her extravagant lifestyle. In Zurich alone, Graham had spent between €20,000 and €25,000. After returning to London, an additional €40,000 to €55,000 was spent on Dionne's behalf. On top of that, the credit card debt alone stood at €20,000 to €25,000, bringing Graham's total financial burden to between €80,000 and €100,000. But the situation worsened. Heather noticed two large deductions from the couple's joint account, payments for the luxury cars Dionne had supposedly gifted them. Upon investigation, Heather learned that Dionne had paid €4,000 to secure the car's contract, which was then placed under Graham's name. Dionne had promised to handle the remaining payments herself, but never did. Now, the entire liability had fallen on Graham, who was left facing a staggering debt of €300,000. Further investigations uncovered a disturbing pattern of deception. Dionne had a history of manipulating and defrauding multiple victims. Among them were individuals like Pang, who lost €150,000, as well as Juan and Marcus, each misled by her elaborate promises of lucrative business investments. Her schemes extended beyond personal networks. In Indonesia, several Muslim individuals were duped into paying for what they believed were discounted Hajj pilgrimage packages, only to discover it was all a scam. It was incredibly difficult for Graham to accept the truth. His mother had been manipulating him all along. It took Heather's persistence, along with help from close friends, to finally uncover the extent of the fraud. Digging deeper, they discovered Dionne had fabricated everything. She was not terminally ill, was not of royal descent, and the funds she used to maintain her illusion of wealth had all been borrowed or scammed from others. In the end, Dionne fled, vanishing without remorse and leaving her victims in financial ruin and emotional despair. Heather never returned to London. The betrayal had cut too deep. Graham, left behind, began the painful journey of rebuilding his life, burdened by debts he had unknowingly accumulated in the name of love and trust. The case was reported to Action Fraud and the police. Authorities initially refused to classify it as fraud, simply because Dionne was his mother. But the story didn't end there. Following the release of the documentary on Netflix in March 2025, renewed public attention and pressure reignited interest in the case. Just weeks later, on April 7, 2025, Dionne was arrested in Singapore and formally charged with fraud. What began as a heartfelt reunion between a son and his long-lost mother turned into a harrowing story of manipulation, emotional abuse,